what is DAX? DAX stands for Data Analysis Expression and is the formula language used throughout Power BI. So it's what is used in your formulas for Power BI. It is a functional language, which means that um, your codes are inside a function. So you call a function to execute your code. In DAX, functions can contain other nested functions, conditional statements, value references, and execution in DAX starts from the innermost function or parameter. So, for instance, if you have something like this, um, assuming this is if you have some sales, calculate some max. If you have a formula like this, your calculation is going to start from the innermost function. So if Power BI sees a formula like this, it's going to start with getting the max, then getting sum, then doing your calculation. So of course this formula is wrong, but this is just give you an idea of how DAX works. And there are two primary calculations you can create using DAX. You can create calculated columns and measures. Calculated before I go into what calculated columns are and what measures are, it's good to understand how DAX. It's good to have an understanding how the DAX syntax works for tables and columns, and you use both when you are calculating. Whether you are using calculated columns or measures. So your syntax is simply So yes, the syntax is simply table name, then column in square parentheses. If there is a space, maybe your table is named as sales space table or employee space tables, then a then there's single quotes to put single quotes around the table name. Let me just show that as an example. So for instance, this table name I have here is DE space sales. If I'm using it in any DAX calculation, I'll need to put a new measure. I'll need to put single quotes around it. So that this is what I mean. As you can see, when I start typing DE, it's automatically the single quote appears around DE sales. But if I were to type student table, there's no single quote around students because there's no space between students and TBL. That's what I'm just trying to explain here. Then I mentioned earlier that when creating calculations using DAX, you can use calculated columns or measures. I think I've talked about measures before, but I'm just going to go about both of them before. So what are calculated columns? Calculated columns are useful when you want to slice or filter or on value, or if you want to calculate, if you want to do a calculation for every row in your column. And you can create them by selecting, there are two methods. So you go to new column from the menu bar or select new column from the modeling tab. So this is what go to the table you want to add a calculated column to, and click on new column under the table, under the menu. So if I click on new column, it automatically gives me a default name for the column. That's column. So maybe I want to have maybe the first three letters of the country. I want to use it as a calculated column. Remember, I said you can use it to filter, or you can use it to do a calculation for all the rows in your table. So maybe I name this first three, and I say equals to right. Country 3. So if you notice it, it's similar to, if you are very familiar with Excel, the codes or the DAX code, most of them are similar to what you would have done if you were using Excel. Of course, this is expected because both Excel and Power BI are have the same producers, or they run on the same platform, or they're built by the same company, that's Microsoft. So you would expect a few similarities. So what I just want to do here is to I'm trying to create a calculated column that gives me the first three letters of the country. And two things that have come out here that I mentioned earlier. The first is using single quotes when your table has space, when there's space between your table name and then um you and then a calculated column itself. So if I press enter, so I just have first three. Okay, so first three characters from the right. I want first from the left. So that's it. So that's simply how to create a calculated column. And if you come to the fields pane here, you will see the name of the column is automatically added to under that table as a column itself. I mentioned earlier that create create calculated column by selecting new column from the menu bar. That's when in data view, or by selecting new column from the modeling tab when in report view. So it's best to be in data view rather than view, since you can automatically see what is created. So if I want to create, I can also create a column by clicking on the report view, which is this, and I just come to under the modeling tab and I click new column. What this means is that let me see last three. I might not see what I have, or I might not see the values as, or like when you are working on data view. So I just I just get an extra column name here that says last three, that shows me that the column has been created. So the only way I will know what has been created on that column is if I click on the data view and I see that that's giving me the last 1, 2, 3. So it has given me what the last how do I have so it has given. Okay, I didn't mention it. First three is the first three, while the last three is the last three characters. You can also adjust things here, so you can do things like rename the column. So say test first. You can. So when you rename the column, it's automatically shows also in the pane.
Sorry, ma'am.
Question more. I have a question.
Okay,
I'm
I was
listening.
asking a question.
Can you hear me? Hello.
I'm with you.
Okay. Let's assume that our table was imported from Excel. The table we were working with was imported from
Yes.
Excel. When we start adding columns on Power BI, does it also mean that the sheet on Excel will also be updating, or is that one is
No.
dependent on? Okay, we won't.
No. No, it's full of this. It doesn't tamper with your sheet on Excel.
Okay,
Somebody else had a question.
Yeah, I was looking at that new column you're creating.
Okay.
So I observed why you put 4 after the country. It was just showing a single letter. I don't know. Was
No,
it supposed?
I didn't know. I did not I was editing the formula for first three instead of last three.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what okay. No,
Like,
what I okay, A only showed because I did
yeah.
not write the number of characters I wanted.
Okay, okay, okay,
I
okay.
just put the right, so it just gave me the first character.
So when you're done, you click enter. It's automatically updates on the
Yes.
new column. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So once you so once you select new column button, the formula bar is populated with a basic name. So you would have seen it in the demonstration. And the required elements for a calculated column are the following: a new column name and at least one function or expression. That's what you have here. So the column name, that's last three, then the function or expression, that's right. Then if you sorry, if you reference a table or column in your calculated column formula, you do not need to specify a row in the table. Power BI calculates the column for the current row for each calculation. Um, so let me see. Let me specify a reference table. I can hear you. Hello?
Yeah, hello.
I can hear
Yeah,
you.
my question is what about just like Excel sheet now? Maybe when I want to I create a column with a particular row in Excel, I can do control copy and control paste as value. If peradventure I want to delete that Canada and I want to change it, okay, I've created a column where that last first amount used I can, and I want to delete that country. Is it possible?
Yes. So you want to delete this country column.
Yeah,
This
that
one.
country column since yeah, that's the one we are
You want
calling
to
out.
okay, so you go to that means you want to edit your table, and that is done in Power Query. So it's for CSLs. You go to these three dotted lines here, more options, and click on edit query. uh, okay, so it's not loading because my table I've changed some things on my table. I'm coming. Okay, so country ID is on my table. I need to add. So I'm going to mute you.
Sorry, but you're muted.
Okay. I said I had to delete those files because they have changed. Like I worked on the files again, and so they have changed. That's why I wasn't seeing them in Power Query. That's why it was Power Query was seeing them as error files. So the calculated column I created on CSL before, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do them again on this student table I have here, and then I'll delete this students column just to demonstrate as per your question. So let me see question. Last. Okay. So if I want to delete this column, as you can see from Power Query Editor, you are not seeing the columns that I created because they are calculated columns, and it won't reflect on your query editor. So I want to delete this column, this name column. I select it and go to remove columns. Click on remove column, and so that just deletes it. And if I close and apply, it's going to throw an error because you have deleted the source of the of your formula. So to avoid this, I'll go back to my query editor, undo my deletes, and we have it back. So what I can do, Reduce query. I don't really need to do this duplicate column. So that's just that. Does this answer your question? I can't remember who asked. Who asked the question about deleting a column? Does this answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
You are muted, man. You are muted.
Sorry. So I was saying that the next another thing you can do with your DAX formula is to create measures. When you use measures in calculating percentages, ratios, complex aggregations, and you can use it to, so by complex aggregation you can have an entire text that is a concatenation of a formula and maybe a body of text. So for instance, you can have a measure that says something like the total number of students is, and what comes after your is your calculation. So you can concatenate the sentence, the total number of students, with whatever you want to add, whatever formula or whatever thing you want to add. So measures are very powerful because you can do a whole lot. I was saying earlier that if you look at the dashboards of organizations like the stock exchange, Nigerian Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange, there's always something like a slider that shows you things like um, highest volume, highest volume, something about total volume of sales and things like that. Sometimes you can, um, if you go behind the scene of what happens in such organizations. So we have situations where you can filter by month, or you can filter by maybe a sector, things like that, and then your text changes. If it's dynamic as you filter things, so you can use measures to do that. uh, so to create a measure, you select new measure from the modeling tab, and the formula bar is shown, which makes it easy to write your DAX formula. This is what I mean. So I want to create, um, so let me select measure. Do I want to create? Okay, so I want to create a measure that is like, maybe I want to multiply. So for every student's ID, let me see. So for every student's ID, I want to have an extra column that is a concatenation of the student's first name, or the first two letters of the student name, and the student's ID. Let me see. And I want to create a measure. Of course, I can use a calculated column for that, but just for the sake of demonstrating, I want to use a measure. Let me see how it will work. So What's the new measure? Cost to student ID is mm, see months.
So, Emma, I would love to find out if we have this slide you're using.
Yes, I'm going to send it to you at the end of the class.
All right, thank you.
So I've created a measure that simply says the student's ID is max A. I don't know why I'm using max A, but yeah, or sum of the student's ID. It doesn't make any sense, but if I bring that measure to a report view, let's see what it's going to look like. Okay, so the student ID is 6. So what it has done from the formula, I said it should add all the students' ID in something that is more reasonable is a count actually. Count. So yes, so this is more reasonable. So I can just use this as a text, the student ID, or I can say something like the total number of students is 3. So that's I can use a measure for something like this. So what this means is that my measure is a concatenation of a text, an actual text, and the count of the student ID of the student IDs on the student table. This number card actually shows the total is actually a count of the student's ID. But if I want to make it more interesting, or I want to make it more like a storytelling, so you can actually go ahead to concatenate an actual text or a sentence with a calculation instead as against just leaving your calculation on a number card. So that's one of the ways you can use a measure as against using a calculated column. And of course, if you apply a filter to your your dashboard or to your report, and you enable your filter to interact with your measure, then things change as you select values on your filter. Let me demonstrate that. So here I have a filter. That's student's ID. So if I say so, the I wanted only student ID, the students that I filtered for only the student that has the ID of 2. That's one student. So the total number of students is 1. That's just a simple way of showing you how your filter will work against your measure or against any number card or a visual. So the required elements for a measure are the same as they are for a calculated column. So a new measure name and at least one function or expression. So with DAX functions, there are so many functions available to shape or to form or analyze your data, and but they can be grouped into 6 distinct categories: for aggregation, for count, logical functions, information function, text functions, and date function. And like Excel, when you start typing your formula into Power BI desktop formula bar, a list of available functions will appear. So you can select what you want, and what is displayed at any point in time is the number will match the letters I have typed so far. Let me demonstrate that. So if I click on new measure here and I say if I start typing A, it will give me all the formulas that are applicable that starts with the letter A. If I say AS, it gives me all the formulas that have AS in between them, starting them and things like that. So same period last year comes up because it has AS in between. That's how intuitive Power BI is. And it will also give you existing measures as well, because of it all yes, it also give you existing measures that have a name that you have typed. So this measure here is former measure I created under student table, and it's showing here because it has AS in between it. So if I type CY is empty next year, same period last year. So that's how intuitive Power BI DAX is. And for aggregation functions, the most used aggregation functions are sum, average, mean, max, sum x, and so many other functions that have x. So sum is just it adds all the numbers in a column. Average returns the average, that's the arithmetic mean of all the numbers in a column. Minimum, that mean stands for minimum, smallest value in a column or between two scalar expression. That's by scalar expression, if you have A and B, it's to select the minimum. Maximum returns the largest value in a column or between two scalar expression. Then anything that things like sum x, mean x, there's max x, and any other thing that have x, they are aggregation functions. So those ones that end with x, they can work on multiple columns, and they can iterate through the table and evaluate the expression for each rows. And um so let me say I want this measure to give me the maximum. I want it to give me the maximum of the student ID. So it is giving me 2. Because I already have 2 in my filter. But if I clear my filter, it gives me 3. Um, if I say minimum, say the minimum, let's say the minimum number of students is 1. It should be student ID. So those are the most used aggregate functions. Then we have counting functions. As the name implies, they are used to count. We have count that counts the number of cells in a column that contains non-blank values. Count A counts the number of cells in a column that are not empty. Count blank counts the number of blank cells in a column. Count rows count the number of rows in a specified table or in a table defined by an expression. And distinct counts count the number of distinct values in a column. So if, for instance, in my student table, I have an extra student ID that is also, maybe there is also one, and maybe the name is Tito. So if I use the distinct count for that, it gives me so it will count it will count distinct values of of student IDs. So if I have 10 student IDs that are one, or 20 student IDs that are five, it will give me, it counts it as just one, as the name implies. So distinct count. And count row is used mostly for getting the volume, mostly for organizations that we have worked with, like banks. It's used for getting their volume of transaction. So maybe a bank like Zenith Bank, they have 30,000 customers that use an ATM machine in a day. If they need to know the volume of transaction, is so they won't count the number of cards um that, or the number of people. They won't count the number of cards that use the ATM machine. That they won't count the distinct number, but how many times. So if I went to the ATM machine 5 times, my volume is 5. And then maybe one person went twice, volume is 2. That's 5 plus 2, that's 7. That's volume of transaction. But the distinct count is Temilade went 5 times, but it's one Temilade, that's 1. And it's 2 Tolu, that's another Tolu, that's 2. So that's how they can so they can say they have 2 customers with 7 transaction volume. Another Another type of DAX function that is used is logical functions, and just like they are used in Excel, and if you are familiar with programming, they are and, or, not, if error. So they are mostly used. They are the most used logical function. So and checks whether both arguments are true, and returns true if both arguments are true, or otherwise it returns false. False. So if I say if R equals red and B equals blue, then it checks, Power BI will check and returns true if both statements are true, or checks whether one statement is true, and not changes false to true and true to false. If checks a condition and returns one value when it's true. Then if error, so it evaluates an expression. If there's an error, it returns the value specified as the expression, or otherwise returns the value of expression itself. So these special functions can also be used with operators. For example, and can be replaced with double ampersand sign in your, and you can use operators such as double and ampersand when you need more than 2 conditions in your formula. Otherwise, it is best practice to use the function name itself, so for readability of your DAX code. So if you need to use maybe and you need to use or I need to use if, you can use ampersand sign, but it's always better to use the actual logical function, so that other people who go through your code on a later date, they can understand what you have written. Let me see if I can demonstrate the count function. Okay. So I want to use a measure to demonstrate to get the count, the volume of transaction for the sales. Okay. So that's how you can use a count. That's how you can use the count row formula. I can also say distinct count. So okay. So the distinct count is the same thing as the So here we have that the volume of transaction is the same thing as distinct count because no two transactions are the same for this table. What else I want to demonstrate? Okay, so logical. So let me say, hmm, let me use a calculated formula for this logical part. So I want to okay. So I want to demonstrate the use of if and product ID. Say product IDs. Let me say 1185. Then so else return else return it is not 85. So um what I just did was to create a calculated column that says that if the product ID, that's what we have here, is 1185, then return a column that says it is 1185. Otherwise, say it is not 1185. So if I filter here and I say I want only 185. So as you can see, the calculated column has just shown me all the ones that are 1185, and it has the logical test calculated column I created says it is 1185. So that's let me demonstrate. And so if I say if product ID is 1185, um, less than 2000. That I do less than 2000. So it says greater than or smaller than 5 or less than or equal to. Okay, so I created a column that says to return if CA sales is greater than or equals to 1185 and less than or equals to 2000. It should return it is between 1185 and 2000. Otherwise, it should return it is not between, and that's what we simply have here. So if you any value that is greater than 2000 or less than any value that is not between that range, it just shows you it is not between. So for instance, this 1204 says it is between 1185 and 2000. That's a simple way to use logical function. And if you observed, I used an ampersand. I used double ampersand in my formula instead of using and, because it was showing error. So this was showing error when I tried to use it, because um I'm using more than two conditions. I now have more than two conditions, more than one condition rather. So another type of DAX function, that is another category of DAX function, is information function. So some of the information function you include is blank, is number, is text, is non-text, is error. So as the name implies, is blank is used to check whether a value is blank and returns true or false. Is number check whether a value is a number, is text check whether a value is a text, and is non-text checks if a value is not text. So blank cells are not text. Is error checks if it checks whether a value is an error and returns true or false. So while it is useful to know these functions, it's always a good idea to actually know what your data type is instead of depending on these functions to provide your data type. So I'll just demonstrate, let me see, this number for product ID. So everything is true because product ID is actually a number. So if I change this to text, so it's false because product ID is a number and not a text. Then next is the text function. Text functions include concatenate, replace, search, upper, fixed. Concatenate is used to join two strings. Replace replaces part of a text string based on the number of characters you specify with a different text string. Search returns the number of characters at which a specific character or text string is first found, reading left to right, and it is case sensitive and accent sensitive. So if you're using search to check for a capital letter A and it finds a small letter, it will pass. Upper converts a text string to all uppercase, fixed, rounds a number to specified number of decimal, and returns the result as a text. This text work very similarly to Excel functions that have the same name. So if you are familiar with Excel, you notice that there is concatenate function, there is I'm aware that there is search, I'm aware there is upper, I'm not very sure fixed and replace. So um, if you are quite familiar with using Excel, Power BI is also similar. Some of the functions rather are also similar to that. So let me see if I can concatenate. Yeah, so let me see. Let me say concatenate logical test. Hmm, let's see what does I do. So the concatenate is as said earlier, it's just simply the concatenation of two text strings. So we have concatenated a text. The answer is with an existing column. That's logical text. Also, let me demonstrate upper. Let's see. I want all the values in this column to be written in upper characters against what we have now. So it has given that's what we have false here. Then the last type of function is the date function. It includes date, now, year, month, weekday. Date returns the specified date in datetime format. Hour returns the hour as a number from 0 to 23. So where you have 12 a.m. returns 0, where you have 11 p.m. returns 23. Now returns the current date and time in datetime format. EO month returns the date in datetime format of the last day of the month before or after a specified number of months. Weekday returns a number from 1 to 7. So if you have a a column that has weekdays written in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday like that, and you want to written in 1 to 3 instead, you can use the weekday formula. Let me just demonstrate that. We have a date function here. So I want the date return. So I'll create a column. Oh, this It's return perspective. Okay. So I entered my dates manually. I entered the random dates manually, and um, what I have returned to me is a long date time format. I can change the format under the format tab here. But this is actually not useful to me right now. Um, let me see. Weekday. Okay. So Monday is the second day. Yeah, so it has returned weekday. So Monday, February 15, 1999. Monday is the second day, so it has returned 2 here, and where we have Wednesday, it has returned 4. Where we have Tuesday, it has returned 3, and that, and on like that. So um, last thing, using variables in DAX expression. So using variables are an extremely powerful part of a DAX expression, and you can define a variable name anywhere in a DAX expression using the syntax var name equals to return value. So a variable can be any data type, including entire tables. I'll Hello.
Yeah, yeah, we're listening.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. But I think I'm
Okay, I thought my screen had stopped sharing. So I want to open a Power BI file that demonstrates using variable in DAX expression. So this is a this variable, this TXN fee summary, what it is trying to show is the total transaction fee for a period of time. And I've written different things, so I've concatenated so many different things. I've added DAX codes, and I've created a formula to just simply show total transaction fee. Let me see if I can get that file. I'm not sure. I'm not allowed to show. Okay, so that file is confidential. Um, let me- so I want to create a variable. So instead of this formula here that just shows measure 3 equals to the distance count of transaction, I want to add a variable instead. I'll just say um uh, this thing. I'll give it a name. Let me say distinct transaction count. say equals to so it's still going to give me the same thing because I've said I've, I just said it should return the variable. So if instead of returning the variable, I want it to return maybe the variable divided by 3. Let me see what that would do. Cos of 24. Mm.
How did you move to the next line? Since after pressing enter, it is supposed to show on the
Alt
visualization.
shift and enter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do is I want to display I want a I'm just using the tab to shift it by one tab space. So I want to display the distinct count. So I want it to have a comma, I want it to have excuse me, I want it to have a comma, I want it to have decimal number. So if I just write it as a sentence and I put it in my format DAX formula, it's not going to format it properly. So what I have my distinct count itself formatted, and then I can now concatenate whatever text I want. So I want to say return so it's still the same thing. But what I have now done is that I have given my distinct count, I assigned it to a variable instead of assigning my entire text to a variable so that I can format my distinct count. So here I can now do the calculation I wanted to do initially. So divide by 3. I can do it now. That's 25,000. Meanwhile, when it was part of the text, nothing, there was an error instead. So that can be used to do a variety of things, and your the way you use that depends on how you can think about what you want to show or what you want to display. Times what you're trying to do is not something that you can you say you Google and you find a solution straight up. So you have to think of creative ways to find a solution to something. So for instance, I have this number card, and number card by default, everything is center aligned, but I don't means that so I can't change the alignment of anything from number card. So I can choose to use another type of visual, and so I can just go to new visual and import another visual from Power BI default or Power BI library. So in working with Power BI, whatever you want to do, you have to be creative. So what you're thinking should be might not really be how we go about something. So I'll give you an example. So we were working with a client to create. They wanted to know their number of loan defaulters, and they could only do that by doing some calculations. But we could have also done it in some other way. So you could have you could have just simply been a calculation of the total number of customers minus total number of defaulters. That will give you the total number of non-defaulters. So it could be as simple as that. Everything you do in Power BI depends on the kind of data you're working with. It depends on the client's requirements. It depends on your level of creativity. But there are always resources online that you can use to improve what you are doing. And with every project you do, so your first project or whatever project you work on initially, you might think that, oh, this is the best project I've ever worked on. But as you work on more projects or as you practice more, you find better ways of doing things. So you might have used a really long formula to do and concatenated so many things. But the next time you are doing it, you might just realize that you can just simply do a measure instead. You can just do a calculated measure for whatever it is you are doing. So you have to be able to think outside the box. So yeah, using Power BI. That ends my Power BI class for me. I don't know if you guys have any questions so far. So any questions so far?
I would really appreciate if maybe next class we all have like a uniform data set we're going to work on and just summarize everything we have done
Uniform
on
what?
like in a uniform data set. Like everyone has the same data set. Then we all work on a summary of what we have done on power visualization so far because sometimes
This
it's
is
not
the
even
last Power BI class.
oh wow. What about next week, man? Are we doing anything different?
Next week is Think So. I think you have to go back to Think So. You said Think So. I don't think you completed the class. And for the files, it's this latest CSAOs files that I've shared. Um, I've shared. I keep sharing the same file with Emmanuel, and he has shared it with you guys. So the only thing that is not on that CSAOs are all these columns and measures that I created today.
Okay, I'll look at it. Thank you.
But I can share this particular Power BI file, particular Power BI file that has all the formulas and measures.
I wouldn't mind, man. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay. If there's no other question, that ends the class. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma.
Okay.
Have a very wonderful day.
Nice.
Thank you.
Bye.